There has always been a rumor in the palace. Whoever marries me will be the future emperor. But only Crown Prince Li Jinyuan didn't believe it. When we were about to get married, he fell in love with an orphan girl who practiced medicine, and after returning to Beijing, he broke off the engagement with me. He smiled and said, "Tom Hua, I only have brotherly and sisterly feelings towards you. You will understand me, right?" Everyone laughed at the prince's absurdity. I would rather lose the support of my family for an orphan girl. But I know that how could an heir to the throne who holds real power be jealous of his subjects? 1. When Li Jinyuan came to cancel the engagement, his father was so angry that he almost fainted. Hundreds of people from the Jiang family witnessed the prince carrying away the betrothal gifts one by one. He looked at me deeply and then smiled. "Tom Hua, I already have someone I love. You are a sensible person, so you will definitely understand me, right?" I vaguely recalled that it was Li Jinyuan who personally asked His Majesty for permission for our engagement. During the years when he liked me, Li Jinyuan would visit Zhang's house every few days. All the rare things are sent to my yard first. Even the servants in the mansion were extremely envious, saying that the prince was deeply in love and was a rare infatuated lover in the world. Even I thought that I would naturally become the crown princess and accompany Li Jinyuan to the highest position. But feelings are something that will change eventually. Although I was puzzled, I had no choice but to compromise due to Li Jinyuan's status as the crown prince. Tom Hua understands. Tom Hua knows that her relationship with His Highness is shallow. As we say farewell today, I wish His Highness and the future crown princess a long and happy life together. After I finished speaking, Li Jinyuan's eyes froze, as if he had not expected me to be so generous. Tom Hua is indeed more considerate than I thought. I hope you can find your soulmate soon. As soon as the prince left, my father called me to the study. Even if our Jiang family is not a royal family, we cannot allow His Royal Highness the Crown Prince to insult us like this. The marriage has been called off. What does father plan to do? Of course I have to go to the palace to meet His Majesty and give my Jiang family an explanation. The Crown Prince has abruptly cancelled the engagement. How should my Jiang family deal with ourselves in the court in the future? The prince made such a big fuss that everyone in the capital knew that he had broken off my engagement. This humiliation is really infuriating. But if the Jiang family does not know what is right and wrong and goes to Your Majesty to discuss the matter, it will probably displease the Crown Prince. I stopped my father and said, "Father, once you come before the Holy Chariot, the relationship between the Jiang family and the Crown Prince will be irreparable." The father frowned. There is more than one prince in the palace. I hurriedly stopped my father from speaking any further and looked outside the door vigilantly. "Father, be careful with your words and actions." When my father came back, his face was covered in sweat and he sat back in his chair in disappointment. I said, "Father, we cannot be hostile to the prince. He is the future emperor and the most beloved prince of His Majesty today." Even though my father was a powerful official in the court, second only to the emperor himself, he could not challenge the authority of the future king. In the end, my father didn't say anything else. I left the study and returned to my own courtyard. I couldn't help but look at the pear tree in the yard that was already in bloom. This was given to me by Li Jinyuan when he was young. That year, the Queen Mother took me to the Eastern Palace, and I met Li Jinyuan for the first time. He had gentle features and was sitting under a pear tree, writing. The young Li Jinyuan was radiant, and just standing there, he looked like a beautiful scenery. When he saw me, he was a little stunned. He said, "What a beautiful sister, mother. Can Yuana marry her in the future?" The queen covered her mouth and laughed. That also requires Tong Hua to nod. Later, Li Jinyuan had someone dig up the pear tree and plant it in my yard. With a smile on his face, he took a knife and carved the following words on the tree. "The lady is beautiful and suitable for the family. I am of one mind with you, and we are known as the best stories in the city." Because of my engagement with Li Jinyuan, my father originally supported the third prince, but later turned to support the crown prince. But the mother shook her head and sighed. Young love is indeed passionate, but also extremely fragile. When the novelty fades, all that remains is conscience. In fact, it is just as my mother said. On one of his hunting trips, the prince met a woman who haunted his dreams. He immediately found me, full of apology. Tong Hua, after meeting her, I finally know what love is. My feelings for you are only brother and sister after all. The words brother-sister love left me stunned. That night, I sat under the pear tree all night. I couldn't understand why Li Jinyuan would abandon the Jiang family for a common woman. What kind of woman has the power to make the prince so obsessed? It was not until I went to the East Palace, wanting to seek a real answer, that I unexpectedly saw the woman in Li Jinyuan's palm. 02. The woman is called Shenrui. She is an orphan who wanders among the people and is also a doctor with extraordinary medical skills. She saw me and bowed. Ms. Jiang, I didn't interfere with your breaking off the engagement with Yuan. A Yuan? She actually called the current crown prince a Yuan? It is true that those who are favored have nothing to fear. In her eyes, the prince of noble status is just an ordinary man. I actually admire her courage. I looked at her and said casually, the prince said that he was almost assassinated while hunting, and you saved him. As a doctor, saving lives is my duty. That's the way it should be. I nodded and looked at the shelves around me, which were filled with various unknown medicinal herbs. Seeing that I was interested, Shenrui walked to a shelf, took out a black medicinal herb, and handed it to me. Looking at the complexion of the young lady, it is probably due to the deficiency of qi and blood that causes her physical weakness. This medicine is called Black Jade Ganoderma, which can refresh the mind and replenish the blood and qi. I took the things and said thank you casually. Miss Shen, I'm afraid that your relationship with the crown prince won't be that easy. Not everyone can get into the royal family. You better take care of yourself. As I expected, the news of the crown prince breaking off the engagement with me spread like wildfire, and His Majesty immediately issued an order to execute Shenrui. In order to save Shenrui, Li Jinyuan knelt directly outside His Majesty's bedroom. When my father told me about this, it seemed like he had vented his anger. I held the teacup in my hand and said calmly, the prince is a smart man, but he has really lost his mind to yell at His Majesty for an orphan girl. Tong Hua, don't you have any resentment in your heart? What's there to complain about? I stared at the teacup in a daze. The love we had when we were young is as deep as the sea, and it can't withstand the passage of time. I never thought that Li Jinyuan would treat me the same way for the rest of his life. It is inevitable for an ordinary man to meet someone who is more attractive than the last in his life, let alone the future emperor. The temptations he will encounter in the future will be no less than those of ordinary men. How could it be possible that sincerity never changes? The only thing I didn't expect was that Li Jinyuan would break off the engagement when we were about to get married. Your Majesty is no longer in good health, and the royal struggle is even more brutal. Today's Imperial Palace has become a vortex of power among various factions, with both open and covert struggles. Li Jinyuan broke off the engagement with me at this critical juncture, which just fulfilled the wishes of many people. My father said that many people have secretly hinted to him that they want to form an alliance with the Jiang family. Among them are many powerful princes in the palace. My father did not accept the olive branches that were thrown to him, but came home to consult with me. He didn't understand. Tong Hua, the prince is not smart enough in dealing with people and things, and he is not smooth enough in dealing with right and wrong. Why do you value him? I smiled and said, because he is the prince. Although the crown prince may not necessarily ascend the throne, as long as Li Jinyuan is not dead or does not cross His Majesty's bottom line, he will naturally have more advantages than other princes. The next day, when the maid was dressing me, she said that the prince was kneeling outside Your Majesty's bedroom. Rumor has it that it rained heavily last night, and Li Jinyuan had been kneeling for too long and was already exhausted, and he never waited for His Majesty to soften his heart. When I heard this, I just remained silent. My mother came to find me and asked me to accompany her into the palace. Mother suddenly came to the palace. Who invited her? Your Majesty and the Queen. It seems that Li Jinyuan's actions really involved the Jiang family. I dressed up and rode in the same carriage with my mother. On the way, the mother whispered, "Yesterday, the orphan girl knelt down with the prince, and she seemed to be very affectionate." Mother, we don't need to worry about other people's affairs. I say all this just to ask you, if His Majesty is determined to bring you and the crown prince together, what will you do? I looked at my mother, and there was a rare hint of tension on her face. I smiled and said, "Don't worry, mother. I have my own way to deal with it." 03. As expected, Li Jinyuan and Shenrui were also in the Changyun hall. They knelt on the ground, like two poor couples who were separated for no reason. When the queen saw me, a smile instantly appeared on her gloomy face. "Tong Hua, your marriage with Yuan heir is still valid. The prince is young and has no sense of propriety in what he says and does. Don't take it to heart." Shenrui's eyes turned slightly red, and she lowered her head to wipe away her tears. Upon hearing this, the prince looked at me with some disappointment. Looking at his expression, it seems as if I am the culprit. I stepped forward and saluted. "Your Majesty, Madam, marriage is always based on mutual consent. The prince already has a lover, and Tong Hua really can't bear to separate them." They both looked up at me at the same time. The expectation in their eyes was inexplicably dazzling. His Majesty sneered, "What kind of person is this? She is just a countrywoman who is not worthy of being in a noble house." The prince stood up and retorted, "Father, you brought concubine Xiao Shu back from the common people. Could it be that she was also a village woman? You are a rebellious son." His Majesty was furious, and the Empress patted him on the back to appease him. The prince leaned over and kowtowed. "Father, mother, if I cannot marry Rui, I am willing to give up my position as crown prince and accompany Rui in the world." As soon as these words were spoken, the scene fell into silence. I looked at my mother, and she shook her head slightly, motioning me to step aside. After a while, His Majesty looked sullen and asked someone to bring pen and ink, intending to draft a new decree. The queen didn't look too happy either, and she wanted to stop it, but didn't know how. In desperation, she turned her gaze to me. "Your Majesty, how about this? Let Yuana marry Tong Hua and take Shenrui as a concubine." His Majesty stopped and said, "That's fine. Tong Hua, what do you think?" Before I could say anything, Li Jinyuan shouted, "Father, how can I let Rui be my concubine? What are you doing? Say it again." The queen quickly had the two of them taken away by force and tried to calm His Majesty down. The farce was finally over, and the queen took me to her chamber and sent away all the servants. She asked, "Tong Hua, do you know what happened between His Majesty and consort Xiao Shufei?" "I have heard of it, but I don't know much." The queen seemed to be lost in thought. She looked at the towering palace walls and talked about the power and women's choices that Your Majesty faced when he was still the crown prince. Concubine Xiao Shufei was a chivalrous woman with a fierce and mean temper. By chance, she rescued the prince who was kidnapped by bandits in Jiangnan, and the two fell in love after spending half a month together. At that time, concubine Xiao Shu did not know the identity of the prince and thought he was just a businessman. The two used to roam around the world, robbing the rich and helping the poor, just like a loving couple in the underworld. Later, His Majesty, who had not yet ascended the throne, brought her into the East Palace with just a few words. From then on, concubine Xiao Shu became the prince's concubine and did not even have the status of a concubine. After the queen finished speaking, she said, "At that time, I was already the crown princess appointed by the late emperor, and concubine Xiao Shu threatened Your Majesty with her life and property, hoping to replace me." I was stunned for a moment. What's next? After that, the queen smiled and said, "Your Majesty did not hesitate and directly married me into the Eastern Palace, thus putting an end to concubine Xiao Shu's thoughts." From then on, concubine Xiao Shu stayed indoors and locked herself in the deep palace.
So, what do men like?
His Majesty must be sincere in his treatment of concubine Xiao Shufei, but he cares more about power than love. The queen continued, "Tong Hua, you look a lot like me. I really hope you can marry Yuan for your own sake and for the Jiang family's sake. I said, My lady, even if you don't marry the crown prince, the Jiang family is still the most loyal subject of the emperor. The queen raised her eyes and smiled meaningfully. That's good. 04. I returned to the Grand Tutor's mansion and told my mother about my conversation with the empress. I asked her, Mother, do you think the prince will choose power like His Majesty did back then? The mother shook her head. No.
Why?
The one your majesty loves has always been the current queen. I pondered these words, recalled the details of my conversation with the queen, and immediately reacted. How could a person who truly holds the imperial power give up the one he loves? The ministers in the court all thought that your majesty married the queen only because he was jealous of the power of the queen's family. The truth is, His Majesty was originally fond of the queen, which is why he gave her the position of queen. If the person he loves is concubine Xiao Shu, then the one sitting on the throne of queen must also be concubine Xiao Shu. Just like today, the prince would rather give up his status as prince and grant her a title for Xinrui. Now that I think about it, the queen told me all this because she hoped that I would marry into the Eastern Palace for the sake of the family. What a pity! Li Jinyuan is not the current emperor, and I am not concubine Xiao Shufei. If I really marry into the Eastern Palace, I will be able to keep my Jiang family safe in the struggle for imperial power. That would be too naive. Perhaps Li Jinyuan's infatuation moved God, and His Majesty had no choice but to agree to his marriage with Xinrui. When I heard the news, I stared at the pear tree in the yard in a daze. He then ordered people to dig up the tree and personally delivered it to the East Palace. Li Jinyuan saw this and looked unhappy. Tong Hua, what are you doing? Are you trying to use this to mock me for being so reckless and giving up? I smiled and said, Your Highness, don't think too much. Our fate has ended. You should return everything you gave me. In addition to the pear tree, I also returned all the things that Li Jinyuan had given me before. Li Jinyuan said nothing, looking at the pear tree thoughtfully. Xinrui happened to appear, and her smiling face froze when she saw me. Ms. Jiang, Yuan and I thank you for your help. She knelt before me and bowed deeply. Li Jinyuan did not stop her and bowed to me. Tong Hua, I will have someone sort out the things you gave me today and send them to you as soon as possible. Thank you. I turned around and was about to leave when Li Jinyuan suddenly called me. Tong Hua. I turned around and asked, What's the matter, Your Highness? I'm sorry. I bowed and didn't reply. Soon it was Li Jinyuan's wedding day, and I accompanied my father and mother to attend in their best attire. Li Jinyuan was wearing a wedding dress with a warm and beautiful smile on her face. Suddenly, I felt a chilly breath. I turned my head and saw the third prince, Li Changyun, sitting in the corner drinking alone. Compared to the powerful crown prince, the presence of the third prince is insignificant. Li Changyun was originally the son of concubine Xiao Shufei. Due to his low status, he only had the status of a prince but no real power. But such a person once led troops to fight and destroyed an entire country. Even with all my achievements, I have not received even a single bit of recognition from Your Majesty. However, his father thought highly of him and often said that he was a rare and gifted child. Perhaps feeling my gaze, Li Changyun raised his glass to me. I clinked glasses with him from a distance and drank the wine in one gulp. I thought that there would be no more intersection between Li Changyun and me. Unexpectedly, just 2 days after Crown Prince Li Jinyuan got married, Li Changyun came to the Jiang family in person to propose marriage. My father came to ask for my opinion, and every word he wrote was full of praise for the third prince. I didn't agree and asked the maid to close the doors and windows. Father, the third prince has come to propose marriage now, but his motives are not pure. I am worried that something unexpected will happen. The father stroked his chin and thought, Tong Hua, what do you think? Father, the Jiang family is loyal to the emperor, not to other forces. Don't put the cart before the horse. My father understood and immediately rejected the third prince's proposal. Who would have thought that the news of the third prince's marriage proposal became known to everyone, and many rumors about me and the third prince began to appear in the capital. Li Jinyuan sent an invitation to the Jiang family, inviting me to a gathering at the East Palace. As soon as they met, Li Jinyuan asked Shenrui to leave. He stared at me for a long time and said, "Tong Hua, are you interested in my third brother?" 05. There was such a strong sense of oppression that I was startled for nothing.
No.
That's such a pity. Third brother is both talented and handsome. Many noble ladies in the capital want to marry him. This test made me realize for the first time that there was something different about the prince. He took me to see the peach tree I had exchanged for and pointed out a piece of missing bark. "You cut off a large piece of skin just to remove those 2 lines of words. I really overestimated your feelings." I said, "Your Highness, this makes Tong Hua confused." Li Jinyuan looked at me deeply and said, "Tong Hua, do you blame me?" "No complaints."
Why?
Even if your Highness had never met Miss Shin, he would have met other women of his choice in the future. Therefore, Tong Hua never asks for true love from men. Being born into a noble family, one should put family first. The love between children is long-lasting, but it is fleeting. If you care too much about it, you will forget your original intention. We stood there for a long time, speechless. I don't know when Miss Shin appeared, and she brought 2 bowls of sweet soup. "Miss Jiang, judging from your complexion, I guess you haven't had a good rest in the past few days. This is the medicinal soup that Rui personally made. You can try it." I took the bowl, but didn't drink it. "Thanks, I never like drinking these, that's thoughtful." Li Jinyuan took the medicine soup from my hand and poured it directly under the pear tree. "It's okay, just think of this tree as drinking for you." I looked at the medicinal soup soaking into the soil and didn't say anything. Li Jinyuan said to me, "Tong Hua, people in the capital are saying that whoever marries Jiang Tong Hua will rule the world. What do you think?" I felt a chill on my back, and a chill spread from the soles of my feet to my entire body. This is the real reason why Li Jinyuan invited me here. There was a smile in his eyes, and he seemed kind and gentle, but every word he uttered was inexplicably chilling. "After I broke off the engagement with you, the ministers who had supported me began to turn against me." Li Jinyuan approached me and continued, "I heard them say a long time ago that whoever you marry will be the future emperor." I quickly bowed and said, "Your Highness, do you believe such unrealistic talk?" Li Jinyuan took a step back and said, "Of course I don't believe it. If a woman can really influence the selection of the emperor, wouldn't that be ridiculous?" "Your Highness is right." He was right. If whoever married me would be the emperor, that would really underestimate the cruelty of the royal struggle. I thought about it and met Li Jinyuan's eyes. "Your Highness, the Jiang family has always been on your side. It was always the case, it is now, and it will always be the case." Li Jinyuan raised his eyebrows, a little surprised. "Why?" "Tong Hua knows very well that only His Highness can save the Jiang family. Every change of emperor is always accompanied by the end of many powerful families, and some are even buried in the vortex of power struggle. The Jiang family is a tall tree that attracts the wind and has long been a thorn in the eyes of major forces. Every decision they make is a game of life and death." I finally breathed a sigh of relief after leaving the East Palace and getting on the carriage. Fortunately, the marriage proposal of the third prince was rejected before, otherwise Li Jinyuan would definitely become suspicious of the Jiang family and abandon the Jiang family's support. Thinking of this, I felt very tired, so I closed my eyes and took a rest. In a daze, I could no longer hear the hawking sounds of the vendors around me. When I suddenly opened my eyes, I found that I was still in the carriage. I quickly opened the car curtains, and what I saw were not streets and alleys, but mountains. "I'm out of town?" See. Why are you running out here when you don't want to take me home?" No sound ahead. I felt something was wrong, and was about to get off the car when a figure quickly came up to me and grabbed my wrist tightly. The other person covered my lips without saying a word. 06. I suppressed my fear and anger, pulled out the hairpin from my hair, and stabbed the man in the neck with it. The man moved quickly and grabbed my hand holding the hairpin. How cruel! This voice, the third prince? The other person let me go and squatted in front of me with a smile on his face. I was puzzled. What is your highness doing? He took the hairpin from my hand and gently inserted it into my hair. I will do whatever Miss Jung wants me to do. He touched my face with his hands, his eyes burning. A single man and a single woman in the wilderness. Even if nothing happened, my reputation would be ruined if the news got out. Your Highness, are you trying to force Tong Hua to give herself to you? Li Changyun's eyes turned colder. Tong Hua, is Li Jinyuan really the only one in your heart? No, Tong Hua only cares about himself and the Jiang family. If I promise you that I will never touch a cent of the Jiang family after I ascend the throne, will you marry me? I stared at his face, trying to find any trace of falsehood in his words. Your Highness, do you still remember that time when you were ordered to go to Yuzhou to deal with the plague? Li Changyun let me go, his expression calm. Of course I remember. Why? Is Tong Hua interested in this matter? I straightened my messy clothes and sat up straight. Your Highness, can you tell me how you dealt with the plague back then? Li Changyun's expression became extremely strange. I smiled faintly. A plague would not kill so many people, but in order to prevent the spread of the plague, Your Highness directly massacred all the people in Manzhou. As luck would have it, the year a plague broke out in Yuzhou, my brother and I went to investigate under false names at the behest of our father, and we narrowly escaped death in the massacre. I hid in the dark and saw with my own eyes that Li Changyun ordered the burning of the corpses, which lasted for 10 days. Yuzhou is too far away from the Imperial city, and due to frequent wars, Your Majesty is unable to investigate the actual situation in Yuzhou. Later, when the enemy attacked Yuzhou, Li Changyun, who clearly had a strong army, chose to abandon the city and leave. When my brother and I rushed to the capital, we learned that Yuzhou had been destroyed. Li Changyun wrote a letter saying that it was caused by the enemy entering the city. In this way, Li Changyun naturally blamed the massacre on the enemy. He thought that no one else knew about this, but I was left as a hidden threat. It was because of this incident that I knew that Li Changyun was definitely not a good person and should not be made a close friend. I can say these things at this critical moment just to give Li Changyun a wake-up call and make him think twice before doing anything. When Li Changyun heard what I said, instead of getting angry, he started laughing. Tong Hua, you are so brave. Aren't you afraid that I will kill you to silence you? Your Majesty is not feeling well now, and the royal struggle is getting worse. The Jiang family is an important part of the balance of power. Your Highness will not kill me. Okay, very good. He lifted my chin with great force. I originally wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to have you, leaving you with no way out, but now I think I underestimated you. Li Changyun took me off the carriage and brought me to a secluded wooden house. The wooden house is built between mountains and water, surrounded by a bamboo forest, with birds occasionally flying overhead. But this place always exudes a sense of sadness. Li Changyun skillfully made a cup of tea for me and sat opposite me without any scruples. He said, "This is the tea my mother grew. Want a taste?" I took a sip and was quite surprised. It turns out that concubine Shu has such a skill. I thought concubine Xiao Shufei was just a swordsman. Li Changyun said, "This is her favorite place, but it's a pity that she could not step out of the palace wall until her death."
D?
Wasn't concubine Xiao Shu confined to the inner palace?
How could she be dead?
07. It was the first time that I saw sadness and loneliness on Li Changyun's face. My mother has always liked the life of the Jianghu. My father brought her back to the palace on a whim. This barrier has lasted a lifetime. Li Changyun said a lot, but what he said was completely different from what the queen told me. I learned from Li Changyun that the reason why concubine Xiao Shu wanted the position of crown princess was because she knew that His Majesty only had the queen in his heart, and she was so heartbroken that she had no choice but to threaten His Majesty with death to let her go. But His Majesty remained unmoved and ordered her martial arts to be abolished, and she was imprisoned in the palace forever. If Li Changyun hadn't said today, I would never have known that concubine Xiao Shu was dead. He said, Tong Hua, I want him to be buried with my mother, so I must sit on the throne. I try to stay calm and not show any fear. Tong Hua, you will help me, right? There are hundreds of people in the Jiang family. I can't joke with their lives and the future of the Jiang family. Tong Hua, I swear, I will be able to protect the Jiang family. Li Changyun came over and hugged me gently. I need you to help me. I need the power of the Jiang family. I suppressed my emotions and said, I need time. Li Changyun let me go and smiled. Okay, I'll give you some time to think about it. Tong Hua, I believe you will give me a satisfactory answer. Before dark, Li Changyun sent me back to the mansion. When my father saw me come back, the tense expression on his face relaxed. Tong Hua, have you been with the third prince since you left the East Palace? I nodded. My father was very worried. Your Majesty's illness is getting worse. The palace may be in trouble. You are getting close to the third prince and the crown prince. Don't worry, father. I will definitely win. I thought for a moment and asked, Father, why did you value the third prince so much? Ambition, said my father. Since ancient times, nothing can be accomplished without ambition. I asked, Father, do you think that once the third prince ascends the throne, will the Jiang family still have a chance to survive? My father said nothing. I think he knows very well in his heart that the more ambitious a person is, the less likely he is to bring trouble to himself. I remembered the conversation with Li Changyun and said to my father, Father, the Jiang family should try to keep their distance from the prince in the future. Things are changing in the palace, and things are changing in the capital city too. 3 months later, news came from the palace that His Majesty's condition had worsened, causing panic among the people in the Imperial hospital, fearing that their heads would fall off if they were not careful. Some even went worse and resigned directly to go home. The Queen's invitation was just delivered to Zhang's family yesterday. At such a critical moment, her purpose in summoning me into the palace was obvious. When I entered the palace, I saw Li Jinyuan and Shenrui there. His Majesty was lying on the bed, clinging to life with his last breath. Shenrui is giving him acupuncture. Only then did I vaguely realize that this woman was also a doctor. But what could a woman like her, who travels around the world, do to treat a disease that even the Imperial hospital was helpless against? Shenrui took the needle and bowed to the Empress. Mother, please forgive me for my poor medical skills. It is difficult for me to completely cure the root cause of your father's illness. The Queen sat on the edge of the bed, her face pale. She waved to me. I walked over, and she held my hands tightly. Tong Hua, it is His Majesty's order to summon you here today. I knelt on my knees facing the bed and asked, Your Majesty, do you have any important instructions? His Majesty turned his head to look at me and said in a weak voice, Tong Hua, I heard that Changyun went to the Jiang family to propose marriage. I couldn't help but look at Li Jinyuan. Your Majesty, Tong Hua and the third prince are not destined to be together. I asked my father to reject this marriage that day. His Majesty continued, I am very pleased that the Jiang family is so loyal and caring. I will need you to take care of the Crown Prince's affairs in the future. Tong Hua understands. His Majesty began to cough and suddenly coughed up blood. Shenrui stepped forward and said, Father, you are too weak. You should rest well. Li Jinyuan asked Shenrui to accompany the Queen to guard His Majesty and took me out of the palace. Seeing that no one was around, Li Jinyuan put his hands behind his back and said, Tong Hua, do you know what disease my father is suffering from? My father told me that His Majesty is ill due to overwork.
Trouble.
Li Jinyuan laughed sarcastically. Since I married Rui, my father has entrusted most of the government affairs to me. How can I be troubled? The Crown Princess is an excellent doctor. I'm sure Your Highness already knows the symptoms. Li Jinyuan faced me, leaned over and whispered a few words in my ear. 08. I was shocked and couldn't accept it for a moment. Li Jinyuan said, Tong Hua, you are a smart person. I know very well that you will not make a decision that will disappoint me. I returned home in great fear and immediately asked my father to write a letter of resignation. The father was puzzled. Tong Hua, why did you let me resign and go into seclusion? I said, Father, the fire in the palace has already started. The only way to protect yourself now is to stay away from the court disputes. Besides, my brother is still at the border fighting the enemy. Today, Li Jinyuan quietly told me that his brother would be returning to Beijing soon. But when I met His Majesty before, His Majesty never mentioned his brother's return to the capital. That means he didn't issue any order. The general who was in charge of hundreds of thousands of troops in the court was suddenly not recalled to the capital. Even if his brother was loyal, it would inevitably arouse suspicion among the people in the court. By then, once the crime of disobedience falls on him, the Jiang family will be doomed. When my mother opened the door of the study, her face was also full of worry. My husband, something happened in the court. The father stood up and asked, What's the matter? The fifth prince strangled himself to death, and the sixth prince drowned in the lotus pond at home. I said, These two princes were both protectors of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Their death means that someone could no longer hold back. He was able to kill two princes, and yet managed to do it without any leaks. His mind was so meticulous. I'm afraid there is no other person like him except the third prince. My father pondered for a moment and asked again, Madam, besides the two princes, has anyone else encountered an accident? The mother said, The Minister of Justice, Wei, died at home. Lord Wei is from the prince's faction. My father said that he had submitted his resignation 2 days ago. Is this to eliminate the prince's cronies one by one? The father was a little hesitant at this moment. Tong Hua, this game is not something you can get out of by resigning from your post. Late at night, I went to Li Changyun's residence alone. He seemed to have known that I would come and had poured me some wine in advance. I raised my glass and drank it all. Li Changyun joked, Tong Hua is so brave. Aren't you afraid that I will poison you? If your highness wanted to harm me, why wait until today? He stared at me, the smile on his face fading. Tong Hua, you said you would give me an answer, but you made me wait for so long. I know that if it takes a little longer, he will definitely attack the Jiang family. Your highness, Tong Hua is willing to join hands with the Jiang family to lend you a helping hand. Very good. Li Changyun's expression softened a lot. If I ascend the throne, I will not let the Jiang family down, and you, Jiang Tonghua, will become my queen. I looked at him quietly. Li Changyun came closer to me, and his warm breath sprayed on my face. Those black pupils seemed to have a kind of bewitching power. He said, Tong Hua, you may not know that I was there when Li Jinyuan asked the emperor to arrange a marriage for you. Your highness, why are you saying this?
What?
I just want to tell you that on that day, in addition to Li Jinyuan, I also begged the emperor to arrange a marriage for us in front of him. But do you know what the emperor said? Li Jinyuan said word by word. He said, Why do you think you can compete with the crown prince? Are you worthy? It turns out that this is what happened on the day when Li Jinyuan asked for an imperial decree. But Li Jinyuan never told me this. Li Changyun hugged me tightly and lowered his head to bite my lips. I pressed against his chest. After he relaxed, I said, Your Highness, Tong Hua came here only to tell you the answer. It's late at night. Please go to bed early. I stood up and tried to leave, but he pulled me into his arms. Tong Hua, can you stay with me tonight? 09. Your Highness, I have not left the pavilion. If I stay here for one night, not only will my reputation be ruined, but how will you let the Jiang family cope with it? Li Changyun hooked his arm around my neck and whispered in my ear, Tong Hua, in your heart, the Jiang family is more important than anything else, right? Nature. Okay, I won't touch you. We have plenty of time. I quickly moved away from him, keeping a distance between us before bowing. Tong Hua bids farewell. Tong Hua, do you know that your brother is going back to Beijing? I froze. Does this matter have anything to do with His Highness? You may not know that when I led my army to attack the state of Chu, your brother came all the way to help me. To this day, he and I are still close friends. Li Changyun actually has this kind of relationship with my brother? Why didn't your brother ever mention it? Tong Hua, This is one of the reasons why I dared to break up with the crown prince. I felt like I was dreaming and my willpower was being drained away bit by bit. The two princes and Lord Wei. Li Changyun kissed my forehead and said, "You guessed right, I did it." I pushed him away and fled from the mansion. Not long after, my brother really returned to Beijing. Shen Rui came to Zhang's house to see me in person and told me that her brother had entered the palace. She said meaningfully, "Ms. Jiang, you must be careful." I waited at home for 5 full days, but my brother didn't come back. I don't know why, but I always feel that something is not right. Until my father came back in a panic, his face covered with beads of sweat. Tong Hua, Pei'er has been thrown into death row by His Majesty. Before I could open my mouth, a group of soldiers armed with weapons rushed in from outside the door. Without saying a word, they took their father away. My father turned to me and said, "Tong Hua, take good care of your mother." After my father was arrested, I immediately returned to my room and wrote 2 letters, one to the East Palace and the other to Li Changyun's residence. My mother is usually calm and reserved, but she almost lost her mind after my father was arrested. "Tong Hua, you just stay at home and relax. I will go back to Duke Zhao's mansion right away." I stopped her and said, "Mother, no. The palace will be in chaos, and we can't involve my grandfather." The mother's eyes were red. "Tong Hua, nothing will happen to your father and nothing will happen to Pei'er, right?" I held my mother's hand and said, "The Jiang family is loyal. My father is in the court assisting the king, and my brother is in the wild guarding the border. Your Majesty is not someone who cannot distinguish right from wrong." I received a reply that day. According to the letter from the prince, His Majesty is seriously ill, and it is impossible for him to order the imprisonment of his brother. It is more likely that he will take his father away. But Li Changyun's letter was completely the opposite. He told me that the prince already knew that the Jiang family had defected, so he took action against them. I am an outsider and don't know whether what the 2 people said is true or not. I wanted to go out, but found that the door was full of soldiers from the palace. "Miss Jiang, no one is allowed to go out without His Majesty's order." I had no choice but to return the same way. At night, a letter appeared on my desk. I opened it and saw that the tight string finally loosened. The power struggle in the palace was far more brutal than I had imagined. In addition to the Jiang family, many ministers in the court were also involved. The Jiang family is still under surveillance, and the various forces have not really wiped out the Jiang family. But the Chun and Qi families were not so lucky. These 2 families were the first to sacrifice in this royal struggle. Similarly, the Chun family and the Qi family are on the prince's side. I immediately burned the letter and went to my mother's yard. Mother hadn't slept the whole time. She just stared at the night sky in a daze. "Tong Hua, I got the news that most of the noble families in the court have met with trouble, especially the wives of the powerful officials in the court. I don't know where they were taken." I nodded. It seems that my father was not arrested because of my brother. But it's because of the upcoming palace coup. Imprisoning a minister's wife and children is tantamount to a disguised threat. 3 days later, the funeral bells in the palace rang and the soldiers guarding the Jiang family withdrew. My heart was beating wildly as I looked at the letter in my hand. "Your Majesty, the car collapsed?"
10.
My mother and I rushed to the palace and saw Li Changyun sitting on the throne with a bloody sword in his hand. Next to him was a woman with a rather gangster air. "Concubine Xiao Shufei? Didn't Li Changyun say that she was dead?" It seems that he doesn't speak a word of truth. Looking around, all the civil and military officials were there. They looked at each other with horror in their eyes, like a lamb to be slaughtered. Only my father was assigned a seat by Li Changyun. When he saw me, Li Changyun smiled and said, "My queen is here." As soon as I said this, everyone looked at me. A minister stood up and pointed at my father and scolded him. "Grand Tutor Jiang, the late emperor just passed away, and you helped Zhou to commit atrocities. How can you be worthy of the late emperor's entrustment?" Before his father could say anything, Li Changyun threw the sword in his hand at him. In an instant, the man was stabbed in the throat by a sword. I knelt on the ground and advised, "Your Highness, it is not the behavior of a king to kill innocent people. What the queen said makes sense. Since you have spoken, I will kill fewer people." He waved his hand lightly, and several ministers were dragged out. Changyun said, "The crown prince is dead, and there is no royal bloodline in the royal family except me. If you all support me in becoming emperor, you can go home and reunite with your families. As for your wives, they can also return home safely." Having said this, my father was the first to stand up and kneel down. "Your Highness, I hereby request that the third prince ascend the throne." After my father spoke, most of the officials in the court knelt on the ground. Some of these ministers were on good terms with my father, while others had been instructed and promoted by my father. As for those who had not yet submitted, Changyun had them taken outside and executed without hesitation. I said, "Your Highness, if you kill all these loyal and righteous people, how can you give an explanation to the people of the world? Since ancient times, kings have always won the hearts of their people with generosity, governed their countries with benevolence, and treated their subjects with kindness. Since you want to be an emperor, you should behave like a king and make the world admire you." He slaughtered his subjects before he even ascended the throne. How is his behavior different from that of a devil? Changyun looked at concubine Xiao Shufei beside him, only to see her nodding at him. He then said, "Okay, I won't kill them. Come on. Anyone who refuses to obey will be thrown into death row first." That day, I was kept in the palace by Changyun. Concubine Xiao Shu came to see me and looked at me for a long time. She said, "There is something about you that makes me extremely disgusted." I leaned forward and asked, "Did the concubine Shu see someone else's shadow in Tonghua? The queen mother once said that I look a lot like her. Now it seems that this is true." Concubine Xiao Shu said, "It's a pity that Jiang Yuan ran away early, otherwise I would really like to see her ferocious appearance." Empress Shufei, I have heard the Empress and the third prince talk about your past, but I don't know which of them is more trustworthy. I told her the stories in detail, secretly observing her expression. After hearing this, concubine Xiao Shu sneered and said, "When I entered the palace, I found out that he already had a lover. I went to him to seek justice, but he locked me up in the deep palace. As Changyun grew older, I thought he would let me go. It's ridiculous that he actually wanted me to die." From what she said, His Majesty was afraid that she would harm the queen, so he directly ordered her kung fu to be abolished and gave it to Bai Ling. Fortunately, she had been in the underworld for many years and escaped the disaster by faking her death. Even His Majesty thought that the woman he brought back had died in the palace. Concubine Xiao Shu said, "If he dares to betray me, I will let him die." So, what if he is the emperor? So, it was you who poisoned His Majesty? This is the secret that Changyun told me at the beginning, and it is also the real reason that led to His Majesty's death. It took me a long time to prepare the poison, and it was worth it for my deep love for him. After hearing that, I suddenly didn't know how to respond. Seeing that I didn't say anything, she sat in front of me and said, "Changyun said that he wants to marry you, so I came to see what kind of woman can catch his eye. Now that you have seen it, are you satisfied, madam?" She sneered. "Satisfied? I said it when I came in. You and Changyun both disgust me. You will never be the queen." After she said this, she stood up and left, leaving me a scripture and a wooden fish. She wanted me to become a monk. 11. That night, Changyun came. He put his chin on my shoulder and said, "Tonghua, I cannot make you queen." "Really?" I was calm. "It's okay, Your Highness. After you ascend the throne, Tonghua will go to Huainan Temple to become a nun." "Tonghua, are you threatening me?" I handed him the things that concubine Xiao Shu gave me. Changyun took a look and understood everything without me having to say anything more. "If that is what mother wants, then you can go and settle down for a while. Once I have dealt with the affairs of the court, I will seek mother's consent to bring you back." I said nothing. Changyun held me from behind and began to take off my clothes. I reached out to stop him. Your Highness, Tong Hua has not left the pavilion yet. This time, Li Changyun carried me to the bed with a firm attitude. It was a ridiculous night, and I got up the next day with a sore back. Li Changyun had already left the room. The maid who came to serve me secretly put something in my hand while she was dressing me. I looked at the maid carefully. Her face was unfamiliar, but her figure was very familiar. The maid also looked at me, but didn't say anything. I looked into her eyes and suddenly remembered. After she left, I realized that what she handed me was a note and a key. When Li Changyun came to see me, I asked to see my brother. He hesitated. Tong Hua, I have already promised you not to touch the Jiang family. Don't push it any further. So, Your Highness wants to kill my brother? Li Changyun touched my face and said, Tong Hua, you know I never leave any hidden dangers. Jiang Pei has hundreds of thousands of troops. If he doesn't die, how can I get the military power smoothly? But isn't my brother a close friend of His Highness? Silly Tong Hua, how can you believe everything? I was filled with disappointment and pushed him away. If you want to kill my brother, at least let me see him one last time. Finally, Li Changyun relented and personally took me to the death row. My brother was covered in wounds, with his hair disheveled, sitting on the grass. Tong Hua, why are you here? He looked at Li Changyun and said angrily, Third Prince, how dare you rebel? Li Changyun laughed softly. If they rebel, what can you do? I hurried forward and held my brother's hand tightly. Brother, Tong Hua is incompetent and can't save you. I slipped the key into his hand without anyone noticing. My dear sister, I don't need your help. As a soldier, I should sacrifice my life for my country. Your Majesty is dead, and I don't want to obey the orders of traitors and villains. Li Changyun forcefully dragged me away. You have already seen your brother, let's go. After returning to the palace, I asked Li Changyun, I want to know how your highness got my brother back to Beijing. He smiled faintly. He cannot return to the capital without an imperial decree. Tong Hua, why don't you guess what method I will use to make him come back alone? You issued a false edict? Your brother is extraordinary. Is it possible that he cannot tell whether the edict is true or false? I was stunned for a moment. Isn't it a false edict? Could it be that he has controlled your Majesty from the very beginning? Did he also force your Majesty to write the edict? No wonder His Majesty suddenly called me to the palace in the name of the Queen that day. Perhaps there were many Li Changyun's eyes planted in the palace at that time, so the Emperor did not dare to say much. Your Majesty has passed away, and the whole country is in mourning. Li Changyun is no exception. Because of this, his coronation ceremony was delayed again and again. In order to vent his anger, he massacred the people who were dissatisfied with him. As time went by, no one dared to say anything about his rebellion. The most pitiful are the historians in the court. They picked up their pens and wrote that Li Changyun was plotting rebellion, killing his father and brother, and slaughtering innocent people, and were tragically beheaded by Li Changyun. The new historian was also stubborn and continued to write down the facts, but he also ended up losing his head. Later, Li Changyun ignored the mourning period and personally set the date for his ascension to the throne. Calculating the time, it will be in 7 days. I was imprisoned in the deep palace and could not go home. I had no idea what was going on at home. Although Li Changyun promised me that he would not deal with the Jiang family, he would definitely change his mind as long as concubine Xiao Shufei opened her mouth. I just don't know how my brother is preparing. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, it was Li Changyun's coronation ceremony. He was dressed in a dragon robe and walked up to the dragon throne with great dignity. A eunuch rushed in and shouted, Your Majesty, the crown prince has brought his men into the palace.
12.
Li Changyun frowned and sat directly on the throne. Isn't Li Jinyuan dead? I killed him with my own hands. There can be no mistake. As they were talking, the sound of killing was getting closer. In less than half an incense stick of time, Li Jinyuan came over in his battle robe. Following closely behind were my father and brother. And those soldiers were all the people who followed their brother to guard the border. My elderly grandfather also appeared slowly, wearing military uniform and holding a rifle. He has white hair, but still has a sharp sword. Li Jinyuan said solemnly. Third brother, do you admit your guilt? Crime? What crime have I committed? On the contrary, you dared to lead troops into the palace on the day I ascended the throne. Are you planning a rebellion? As soon as he finished speaking, the archers hiding everywhere drew their bows and prepared to shoot. Are you not the one who rebelled? Li Changyun gave the order to shoot arrows without saying anything. In an instant, thousands of arrows were fired, and the ministers sought for shelter. However, these arrows that were supposed to be shot at Li Jinyuan were all shot towards Li Changyun. Li Changyun's face darkened. It seems that you have been prepared for this. Li Jinyuan said, your people have already been exterminated. Third brother, now that death is imminent, it is time for you to wake up. Li Changyun stood up from the dragon chair with no fear on his face. He looked at me and said softly, Tong Hua, you were also involved, right? I said, Your Highness, I have said before that the Jiang family is loyal only to the emperor. You also said that it doesn't matter who is the master. Yes, but a ruler should not be a person who kills people without mercy. The king is facing the country and the people of the world. A cruel king can only be a disaster for a country. Li Changyun didn't say much and showed the sword in his hand. Before he could do anything, a man was brought before him. Concubine Xiao, she was tied up and thrown to the ground. She shouted fiercely, Long Shan, run, run. Li Changyun's originally calm expression suddenly changed. Li Jinyuan, you dare to threaten me with my mother? Before she could finish her words, Concubine Xiao Shu committed suicide by biting her tongue in front of everyone. Li Changyun went crazy and raised his sword to attack. In the end, he was outnumbered and stabbed through the heart by Li Jinyuan's sword. Before he died, he turned his head towards me. I looked at him. He said nothing and slowly closed his eyes. Li Changyun was dead, and Li Jinyuan blocked all the petitions for enthronement. He said, My father has passed away, and I will mourn for 3 years. This palace coup was completely over at this moment. Li Jinyuan is the crown prince and the heir to the throne designated by Your Majesty. He suppressed the rebellion and ascended the throne, which was what everyone expected. Compared with Li Changyun, he is more popular. After returning home, I asked my brother the real reason why he returned to Beijing. He took out an imperial edict and said, The moment I received it, I knew it was a letter from His Majesty asking for help. It turns out that there is a secret text between His Majesty and his brother that only they can understand. This imperial edict contained a request for help. That's why he rushed back without stopping. Who would have thought that as soon as he entered the palace, he was thrown into death row by Li Changyun? Without his brother's support, Li Jinyuan lacked the most advantageous reinforcements, which led to his defeat by Li Changyun. The elder brother said, Tong Hua was the one who had foresight and had his father pretend to defect to the third prince in advance, thus saving the lives and property of the Jiang family and most of the ministers in the court. Every royal struggle is like a big chess game. If you make a wrong move, the whole game will be lost. Fortunately, although my brother was at the border, he was able to detect the problem through the imperial edict and thus won the game by taking advantage of the situation. By the way, the third prince said that he once personally killed the crown prince. With his ability, it is impossible for him to kill the wrong person. The elder brother laughed and said, It's all thanks to the crown princess's superb disguise skills. I immediately went to the palace to meet Shenrui and told her how she had risked her life to see me by disguising herself as a palace maid. She said, Rui is just an ordinary person. If I can meet Miss Jiang and complete what a UN entrusted to me, I will have no regrets even if I die. The crown princess is extremely courageous. Tong Hua admires her. Miss Jiang remained calm in the face of danger and dealt with the third prince regardless of her own life. Such courage is even more admirable. In fact, I never knew that the crown princess was proficient in the art of disguise. When I saw her that day, I was really amazed. Shenrui touched her belly and smiled gently. These are just trifles, not worth mentioning. As soon as I saw this movement, I understood. Is the crown princess pregnant? Yeah, exactly 2 months. Congratulations, she said. Miss Jiang, I have always been very grateful to you for your help. Don't thank me, it's your blessing. Li Jinyuan and I were never meant to be together, and there is no such thing as a latecomer taking the upper hand. 3 years later, Li Jinyuan ascended the throne. The prestige of the Jiang family in the court rose step by step, and even his brother, who is far away at the border, was granted a title of nobility. This is the most glorious moment in the history of the Jiang family. Li Jinyuan kept his word and ensured the survival of the Jiang family. His father was worried about this. The Jiang family is too powerful. Will it threaten the imperial power? I said, Father, do you really think that as a subject, you can threaten the king? Tom Hua is saying that your majesty has never taken the threats from powerful officials seriously? How can anyone who can become an emperor be incompetent? As for Li Jinyuan, he now holds real power. Whoever he wants to kill will definitely not live beyond tomorrow. Why would a person with such power and status be jealous of his subjects who could be killed by him at any time and anywhere? Because of this, he could break off the engagement with me without any scruples, marry the woman he loved most, and even insisted on making her his queen despite everyone's opposition. In those days, there were rumors in the palace that whoever married me would be the king, but Li Jinyuan was the only one who never took it to heart. He knew very well that the emperor's power was above all else. As for Li Changyun, the reason why he wanted to marry me was more or less influenced by those rumors. As spring arrives, the courtyard is filled with the fragrance of flowers. I stood in the middle of the yard, looking at the tall city walls. I think it's too boring to stay at home, and it's time to go out for a walk. Over.